All right. Okay, ready? Just hit play. Hey team, it's Tommy here. I'm a personal trainer at Jets, and today I'm going to be talking about how you can design a training program backed by science. You may be someone who has been in the gym for a little while now. You're getting quite consistent with your training, which is awesome. But if you do feel like you're not quite getting the results that you should be, we can change a few things. You could have a chat to a personal trainer and get into some PT sessions, or if you like, you could actually start to design a training program yourself, which I'm going to show you how to do today. Proper program design always comes with two different sides. One important part will be our variables, the other will be our principles that we want to try and follow. So let's take a look at our 6 program variables. Our first training variable is muscle action. When we talk about muscle action, we're thinking about the type of action the muscle is doing when it's contracting. So when we lift a weight, for example, with a dumbbell bicep curl, we have 3 muscle actions: concentric, eccentric, and isometric. We'll use a dumbbell bicep curl as an example. It's always the easiest. Our concentric muscle action is when the muscle is shortening, we're lifting the weight up. Our eccentric muscle action is when the muscle is lengthening and we're lowering the weight back down. And we also have an isometric muscle action, which is where the muscle is activating, but it's not shortening or lengthening. So it might be where we do just a bicep squeeze, maybe like a plank, a wall sit. These are all exercises where we would be doing an isometric muscle action. So let's have a look at our second program variable, which is rest periods. It's a pretty obvious one. Our rest periods are just the amount of rest we take in between our sets or in between our exercises. And I like to keep things simple and think of rest periods as being either short, medium, or long. Generally with your rest periods, it depends on what your training outcome is. But if your training outcome is maximal strength and you're really lifting some heavy weights for a session, you're generally going to want to rest for a longer amount of time, let your muscles recover so you can keep doing heavy sets as safely as possible. If your training outcome is more based around muscular endurance and fitness, then you'll probably shorten up your rest periods and you want to build a little bit of fatigue. So you may only rest for 20 or 30 seconds if that's your outcome. We might have, say, in the middle, if someone's aiming for hypertrophy, like muscle growth is what we're talking about there, then you might have sort of medium, moderate amount of time for your rest, 1 or 2 minutes in between sets. Our third training variable, and this one is kind of broken into 2 here, it is our loading and our volume. Or sometimes I like to use the word intensity instead of loading, but loading, intensity, and volume. When we talk about loading or intensity, what we really mean is the amount of weight that we're actually using. So if we use a bench press, for example, if you were to do a bench press at 50 kilograms, then that is a lower intensity than if you were to do a bench press at 60 or 70 or 80 kilograms. So loading and intensity is just how much weight we're actually using and lifting. And our volume, that is all about how many reps and sets we're doing. So if someone was to do 3 sets of 10, that's going to be more volume than someone who's only doing 2 sets of 10. It's really important to have a little bit of a plan with your loading and your volume, because it's probably the most important factors in your training. If we get the loading and the volume right, we'll definitely get the best results, or we should get the best results possible over a long period of time. We can think about low volume, moderate volume, and high volume, and we can also think of our intensity or our loading as low, moderate, or high. If your loading is really high and you're wanting to lift nice, like big, heavy weights, again, bench pressing, you're lifting your body weight, maybe even more, then our volume has to be low. We simply can't lift heavy weights over and over and over again. We can't do 20 reps of a really heavy weight. We might only get 1 or 2 or 3 reps done. So a high loading will have a low volume, and opposite, low load we can probably do for high volume. So if we're just bench pressing a nice light weight, let's say the bar is really easy for you and you can lift the barbell, 10 reps, 15 reps, 20 repetitions, then you've got a low load there or a low intensity, and you can perform it for a high volume. Our fourth training variable that we'll talk about today is our repetition velocity. So velocity, all about speed, and basically how fast are we doing our repetitions. Good example might be, our push-ups. You see some people doing push-ups in the gym and they're just banging them out really quick, boom, boom, boom. They might be able to get 10 or 15 reps done in, less than 10 seconds. And that would be a really high training velocity or high repetition velocity. You may look at someone else in the gym and they may be practicing a slower repetition velocity. They're doing their push-ups as well, but they're going really slow on the way down, slow on the way up. And for them, for their 10 reps of push-ups, it might take them 20 or 30 seconds. Again, I like to keep things simple, and we can think of our repetition velocity as slow, medium, or fast. For most people in the gym, I like to recommend just a medium pace, keeping our exercises under control and keeping things safe. However, if you're looking to change things up, challenge your body in different ways, then we might start to try some slower repetition velocities where we may do, for example, a bicep curl, 3 seconds on the way down and 3 seconds on the way up. It's quite slow. The muscle's going to be straining for a longer period of time. That means we're going to have more time under tension, and perhaps that will be a greater stimulus for muscle growth and strength increases. There's different reasons why we might practice slower repetition velocities. Vice versa, we may do some training with high velocities, things like our power and plyometrics training, box jumps, medicine ball slams. These are good exercises or good examples where we will use higher repetition velocities. The training outcomes there may be more around sports and athletics performance. I'm thinking in my head of someone who can dunk a basketball. You can't do that unless you have really explosive power in your legs, and you need to be training with a higher repetition velocity. Our fifth training variable is exercise selection and order. So this is another just really important variable in our training program or our program design. What exercises are you actually going to select? What are you going to do on Monday? What are you going to do on Wednesday? What are you going to do on Friday? There's a second part to that, and that is the actual order of which we do our exercises. So let's say you're doing squats, push-ups, and box jumps. Well, what order do you do them in? What exercise do you do first? Usually with exercise selection and order, start with exercise selection. We obviously want to select and use exercises that are specific to what we're trying to achieve. The other side to our exercise selection order is the order, and usually with the order of exercises within any training session, I usually like to suggest start with the biggest muscle groups first. The biggest, most fatiguing, most demanding exercises can be at the start. That might be our deadlifts, our squats, our bench presses, our pull-ups, all the multi-joint, multi-muscle movements. We can perform those at the start of our session. As we get towards the end of our session, we might include more isolated, smaller exercises where we're using smaller muscle mass, things like our bicep curls, our calf raises, our isolated shoulder work like our front raises or side raises. So if you select the right exercises and you order them correctly, that will be the safest and the best way to train. And finally, our sixth training variable is frequency. So frequency just basically means how frequently are we going to train? If you're super busy and you can only make it in the gym twice a week, then that's all right. Your frequency is going to be 2 times per week. We can go a little bit deeper than that and think about the actual frequency of specific exercises, specific movements, specific muscle groups. So for example, what is the frequency that we train our quads? What is the frequency that we train our shoulders or our biceps? And the frequency of training muscle groups will be a bit different depending on who you are and what your training history is. I think for most people, 1 to 2 times per week for a muscle group is perfect. You may want to do workouts that are a little bit more whole body, and you're doing a bit of legs, bit of upper body, bit of core in each of your sessions, and that's cool. Your training frequency might be 2 or 3. If you're taking a little bit more of a bodybuilder program approach, and every single session may have a dedicated muscle group. Monday you're doing chest like everybody does. Tuesday you're doing legs, and we break our week up like that. then you may only have a frequency for those muscle groups of once per week, but that's all right as well. There's different ways to do it and different outcomes for our training frequency. So the second side, the second part, the second focus to our program design are our training program principles. So there are 6 training principles that we want to try to follow as best as we can when we're designing a program and when we're progressing through our weeks and months of training. Our first training principle is overload. Now with overload, what that basically means is we constantly need to be trying to overload our body, our muscles, our tendons, our nervous system, all the different parts of our body that we're training. We need to be trying to, at some point, overload that system. So if you are someone who's been in the gym for 3 or 4 months now and you're still putting the pin down to number 5 for your chest press, at some point we need to go to number 6. We need to go from the 5 kilo dumbbells to the 6 or 7 kilo dumbbells. We need to try and aim for 12 reps instead of 10. We need to add in a 4th set instead of always doing 3 sets. Let's try and aim for a little bit more. Now we don't need to overload every session every week, but at some point we do want to add in overload to our training every couple of weeks. And again, if we have it in the back of our mind, we're thinking about the long-term goal in mind that we want to progress. And that's about as simple as overload is. Our second training principle is specificity. With specificity, what that basically means is our exercises and our training program, it needs to be specific to you as an individual. Or if you're designing a program for a friend, the program needs to be specific to that person. Again, if I have someone come in and they are a basketballer and they want to train for basketball, and they need to be able to jump and run, and our training needs to reflect that. Our training needs to have some of those movements and actions involved, and for our everyday people where we're just trying to maybe build a bit of strength and build a bit of muscle, then our exercises need to be specific for that as well. If I'm someone that has really dodgy knees from years of playing sport, then the exercises, I'm probably not going to start choosing plyometric jumping, landing exercises in my program. It's just not going to be specific to me. Maybe some better exercises would be some slower, more controlled, isolated legs exercises. I could probably zone in on my quads, zone in on my calves, hamstrings, and do some really particular, safer, more controlled exercises where I'm not going to be risking my knees. Our third training principle is progression. Now, progression can come in a lot of different forms, but the overall idea with progression is we need to progress from the easy stuff to the hard stuff. So if we find ourselves always sticking to the same exercises, doing the same sort of things that we're comfortable with, we may not be getting the best results possible. So some examples of progression may be to take a simple exercise and make it a little bit more unstable, include a little bit more coordination and stability in our movements. Really good example might be something like a squat, even if it's just a body-weighted squat where we sit down to a box and stand back up, a squat to stand or a sit to stand. That is awesome, but at some point we need to progress that exercise, and that might be with a weight. We might hold a kettlebell or a dumbbell in our hands. With our squats, we can progress right up to an exercise that is as advanced and difficult as a single leg pistol squat, where we just do a squat on one leg, really tricky exercise. Our fourth training variable is individualisation. Now, again, individualisation, a little bit like our specificity, we need to individualise the program and make sure our program is right for us, right for me, right for you, right for me, right for your body. I like to think there's been actually a really good example lately of a young fellow that has come into our gym and he's training. His arm is not fully formed on one side. So for him, he has a bit of a different, constraints to deal with his upper body. And this young fellow with his arm, we need to make sure his exercises are individualized and fit for him. So it's been really awesome to see this young man adapt his training and work with a personal trainer to find new ways, individualized ways to still do deadlifts, still do squats, still do all the great exercises that we love. But his training program just needs to be a bit more individualized. And that goes for any one of us. It might be injuries. It might just be that you need to individualize your program to include exercises that you enjoy. You know, if you don't enjoy doing push-ups and you absolutely hate them, or burpees, that's one that a lot of people tend to hate, you know, it's all right to not include them, but we need to individualize the program. We need to have something in there that's still going to get us results. Our fifth training principle is adaptation, and adaptation is the good part. It's where we get the results from our training. Our muscles grow, our tendons strengthen, our brain and our nervous system rewire, so our body finds ways and it does its thing to adapt, and we get the results from our training. The last training principle that we want to keep in mind is maintenance, and maintenance is a really important one. Basically what that means is, can we maintain our training over a long period of time, and are we doing the things necessary to make sure we can maintain it? When I think of maintenance, I think of things like sleeping well, eating well, having a break where you need, and then getting straight back to it where you need. So long as we practice good maintenance skills, then we can train for long and we can get the best results possible. So let's take a look at how we can use our training program variables to specifically implement our training and design our training for the desired outcomes that we are looking for. Now, there are usually 4 main training outcomes when it comes to resistance training, and these outcomes have been outlined by a man named Stephen P. Bird in a journal article from the Journal of Sports Medicine called Designing Resistance Training Programs for Enhancing Muscular Fitness. Our first specific training outcome is muscular endurance. This is the ability to produce force for high repetitions. Our specific guidelines for muscular endurance is to perform 1 to 3 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions, use a rest period of 30 to 60 seconds in between sets, and a frequency of 2 to 3 days per week. Our second specific training outcome is hypertrophy. Hypertrophy just meaning muscle growth. Another way to think of hypertrophy is increasing our muscles' cross-sectional area. For hypertrophy, our specific guidelines there is to use 4 to 6 sets of 8 to 15 repetitions, rest for 1 to 2 minutes between sets, and a frequency of 3 to 5 days per week. Our third specific training outcome is maximal strength, so the capacity and the ability for our body to produce really large amounts of force and lift heavy weights. Our specific guidelines for maximal strength is 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 8 repetitions, using rest periods of 3 to 5 minutes in between sets, and a frequency of 3 to 5 days per week. Our fourth specific training outcome is power. Now, power refers to the capacity and the ability to produce large amounts of force with our muscles over a very short period of time. So I like to use the word explosiveness when it comes to power. That's the best way to think about it. Our specific guidelines for power are 3 to 5 sets of just 1 to 3 repetitions, using quite long rest periods up to 5 minutes or even longer between sets, and using a frequency of 4 to 6 days per week. So there you have it, team. I hope this video has been helpful. Keep your training variables in mind, follow your training principles, get some specifics down, and we will get the best results possible. We'll build strength, we'll build muscle, we'll be more powerful and athletic and healthier and fitter and happier than ever before. We'll see you in the gym.
Thanks for watching Jets Australia on YouTube. For more fitness inspiration and workout ideas, be sure to check out the links on the screen and make sure you subscribe so you can work out on your terms.